Hello everyone. This is our third session on social theory for religious studies, and I'm going through some of the old classics. And so right now I'm going to talk to you today about Max Weber, one of my personal favorite theorists. Max Weber lived about the same time, a little bit after Emil Durkheim, around the turn of the century, from the 19th to the 20th century, and he was a prolific writer and analyst. He is most famous for his book, which is called the Protestant Work Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, which he published in 1915. And now I'm going to share my screen with you. Sorry about the light. I can't seem to quite get my lighting right on these sessions. So we're going to talk about some of his concepts: collectivity versus individuals, his concept of rationalization, which is one of his bigger contributions, and his concept, or his methodology, I suppose, of using ideal types. We'll talk about what those are and how he uses them. Also, he develops three ideal types in terms of types of authority. And we'll talk about those. And he also develops ideal types in the realm of different kinds of salvation strategies. He's a bit controversial. A lot of people disagree with his thesis that Protestantism had anything to do with capitalism. Other people strongly agree with it. His analysis examines the themes of idealism, or idealists, and materialists, and the relationship between economics and ideas. Now, in this case, we're not using idealist in the typical sense. We're talking about idealist as a philosophy or an orientation, as opposed to materialism. That would be theorists who believe that ideas have an influence on social structure. Rather than trying to reduce his analysis to one or the other, he attempts to develop a more subtle analysis of the complex interactions between the two. Weber's classic study, by the way, it's German, and I had to retrain myself to call him Max Weber instead of Max Weber. But if you want to sound sophisticated at the higher levels of education, you should say Max Weber. Weber's classic was a study of the relationship between Protestant and capitalism, as I've already mentioned, but he also developed detailed arguments about comparative religions, including Hinduism, Taoism, Confucianism, and ancient Judaism, which I found to be fascinating reading when I was still in graduate school. He examines the development of religious institutions and the role of charisma, or the charisma of extraordinary individuals. And he identifies three primary charismatic individuals in religious systems: prophets, reformers, and founders. Jesus was obviously a founder. Muhammad was also a founder, but he can also be considered a reformer. That's just a few examples. Other types would be Gandhi, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. They were obviously charismatic, although at the moment I don't know which. They would either probably be considered prophets or reformers, most likely reformers. Weber, unlike Durkheim, emphasized the need for sociology to be the study of individual agency. He argued that although individuals act in groups, groups themselves do not act, an important distinction. Another theme of Weber's analysis is the status groups, which is a bit more parsimonious than Karl Marx's idea of social classes. You could have a number of different status groups within one social class, for example. For Weber, status groups have a different access in prestige and privilege, and indirectly to economic opportunities, thus in conflict with one another to gain access to these differentials. Religion and religious ideas are relevant to Weber's analysis inasmuch as they lead to common action, which enables groups to gain access to prestige and economic power. Weber saw some religions as serving the needs of a particular status group. If it was a high class or high status group, the religion would be serving a legitimating function, as happened during the Dirty War in Argentina with the Catholic Church to some extent. If it's a low status group, such as rural peasants in Mexico, religion might serve as a revolutionary or a call to social action. Collectivity versus individuals. The social aspect and the role of status groups are an important part of Weber's analysis, but he also gave a very strong emphasis on the individual. He believed that it was important to study human action in relation to the subjective beliefs of the actors. Unlike Durkheim, Weber suggests that culture is ultimately vested in individuals rather than some external collective construct. Weber understood that religion had a conservative force, maintaining and validating particular forms of stratification. Weber also viewed religion under the right circumstances to be a force for change in society. Protestantism was not merely the child of capitalism, but was one of a complex set of processes that enabled the development of capitalism. Protestantism and capitalism are intertwined, but not in a simplistic way that might be suggested by Marx's historical materialism. He also works with this idea of worldview, which is a cousin to ideology. Peter Berger calls it the plausibility group, a plausibility thing. So worldview arises out of the interaction between both economics, or the material, and ideas. His classic book was The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, written and published in 1915. He affirms that capitalism is not a new phenomenon, but always had existed to some degree. He also does not put forth the idea that Protestantism caused capitalism. That's a common misunderstanding of people who are critical of Weber but haven't really studied his work. He basically says that Calvinism, or ascetic Protestantism, had an affinity that was conducive to capitalism. Modern capitalism he sees as something new. It's rationalized capitalism is of recent origin. That is, a rationalized system of capitalism. This type of capitalism is characterized by large capitalist enterprises with long-term rationally planned investment of capital, a complex division of free labor, and a market economy. The ethos which underlay this economic structure was one which validated work as a moral good or a value in and of itself, which not many human beings, I don't know if I should say not many, but not many human beings see work as a positive plus. The idea of one's duty to calling, this is an idea that has some roots in Lutheranism. Martin Luther came up with the idea of one's vocation or calling, and Max Weber brings this forward as part of his analysis. And as I said earlier, this economic ethos in Weber's view is in direct opposition to normal human tendency. So he sought out an explanation about how this new ethos originated and spread and came to dominate society. That is, an ethos to work really hard but consume as little as possible. Hence the ascetic part. And also hence that allows the accumulation of large amounts of capital. The Reformation is not seen as being necessary for the origins of capitalism. It is, however, essential in its spread and success. The relationship between the two is indirect. Weber demonstrates a paradoxical relationship between Protestant asceticism and the interrelated ethos of everyday economic life. So he's suggesting that Protestantism is only one of many causal factors which enable the successful development of capitalism as an economic and social institution by giving individuals an ethos, or a theology, which enabled them to work within a capitalist framework. And as I said, enabled them to work tirelessly and very hard, compulsively one might say, and to consume as little as possible. So it's not like the luxury elites who are wealthy but they have their own islands and yachts. These people work really hard and live frugally. I'm going to try to finish this before the 15-minute time is up, but I keep getting cut off. Weber's comparative works cover religion in China, which included Confucianism and Taoism, Hinduism and Buddhism, and ancient Jewish religion. In each one of these comparative studies, Weber's interested in demonstrating the relationship between distinctive forms of religion and equally distinctive forms of social and economic structure. Reinhold Bendix brings together some of these themes in a 1990 book on Weber and suggests that the God idea will be formulated in a way in each religion which fits into the political structure of the ruling or religious elite. An ideal type is an analytical construct created by the observer. It presents associations among related elements and organizes them into a coherent structure for the purpose of analysis. For example, in his idea of types of authority, he uses three ideal types. The traditional authority, which the example would be the old nobility in Europe. Rational legal authority, the example would be any bureaucratic office holders. And charismatic authority, which would include prophets, reformers, and founders. And charismatic authority is based on direct personal appeal. And charismatic leadership, he says, in part arises in response to social conditions of crisis and chaos. Maybe we should hope for some charismatic leaders to rise up in this year of 2020. In aging organizations or religions, charisma is routinized. In other words, in Christianity, it went from Jesus to Paul to the popes. Henry Ford after his departure from his company. Ideal types allows a more dynamic analysis than does functionalism, which is more static. 4 types of salvation strategies. There's inner-worldly asceticism, other-worldly mysticism, inner-worldly mysticism, and other-worldly asceticism. Other-worldly ascetics would be those that withdraw into the mountains or to the desert to eat as little as possible and to meditate, and maybe even live in harsh conditions. Inner-worldly asceticism is the kind of asceticism that described Calvinistic entrepreneurs who accumulated great capital and became the founders or leaders of capitalism. Some of the criticisms of Weber is he implicitly used the idea of evolutionary theory, as almost everyone did back then. Weber's analysis suggests that societies progress based on increasing rationalism, yielding ever greater complexity and specialization, which also contributes to secularization theory and modernization theory. He did not endorse a view of unilinear evolution, but was closer to a multilinear paths of evolution. Hence his comparative studies of India, China, ancient Israel, and modern Protestantism. And societies may develop along a number of paths, but in Weber's analysis there's commonly an underlying process, which is the idea of increasing rationalism. More recent scholars of religious studies who stand in Weber's theoretical tradition would include Joachim Watch, or Joaquin Watch, using my Spanish, and Brian Wilson. I would add to that Robert Bella, who's a more recent scholar of religious studies. And it looks like I made it just under the wire. I'm glad I don't get cut off this time, and I will look forward to seeing you soon. We're going to continue to talk about political culture and some using Weberian theory to analyze religion in Latin America. Thank you. Have a good day.